Hello, everyone, and welcome to Solshow. My name is Sol, and today we're going to be talking about Spider-Man. Spider-Man. This is Spider-Man 2002, directed by Sam Raimi. It is so weird because when I was a kid, it was just Spider-Man. I played the Spider-Man like PS2 games, and this came out like in 2002. I would have been 5 years old. So, from that perspective, these Spider-Man movies and the games I played, that's just what Spider-Man was. Toby Maguire was Spider-Man. It was just Toby Maguire Spider-Man, and now there's a whole universe of Spider-Man, and kids these days got like a new golden era of Spider-Man where I just had one movie franchise and that was enough for me. But with No Way Home really bringing everything home, um, with that being said, I thought it was time to go back and watch the Spider-Man movies. No Way Home comes out in a couple weeks as of the time of this recording, and I haven't watched these films in at least like I want to say somewhere between 5 to 10 years. Probably like at least 8 years if I had to guess. And I've seen clips since then. I've seen reviews, and I've been trying to like really judge how I would enjoy these movies again, or how much I should say. Like there have been other films like Star Wars. I went back and watched all of the Star Wars films, and that just didn't have the effect I thought it was. I enjoyed the movies, just not where I thought I would. And with Spider-Man, I enjoy it just about as much, and I don't think despite being like Spider-Man, if I had to give my favorite superhero away, it would just be Spider-Man. I think he has the best, most relatable to me story because everyone who starts off comic book movies like this, they're young boys. So seeing this high school guy who couldn't get laid, get a bunch of powers, and then he becomes kind of more snarky and Tobey Maguire not so much, but just that story and Mary Jane and all the other bad guys, everything about Spider-Man I really loved. And these movies were what I thought like this I just thought that was it. I was so oblivious to the comic book world. It was just Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. And I really like the high school aspects of this film because I thought it was a lot more high school, and going back and watching like obviously not in high school actors play high school characters, it was a little jarring. Toby Maguire, James Franco, they don't look like they're in high school. They look much older, but we're not in high school as long as we thought we were, because I know every time we got to adapt Spider-Man, we got to go back to high school, and I was kind of not looking forward to it again, but actually the high school shit, like when he's first getting his powers, the wrestling match, Bonesaw, he's ready. Yeah, I love all of that. I think those are my favorite parts of this film, and those are the parts I remembered as much as a kid, and they're super corny half the time. This is a faithful comic book adaptation in certain regards. You actually get corny comic book dialogue, especially when Willem Dafoe is Green Goblin. He's talking in his sinister villain voice, and it's so great. But I don't want to lose where I was. The high school stuff is great, and then after that, he roommates with Harry. That becomes interesting, and you get a lot of Harry Osborn and a lot of Norman Osborn. And as a kid, a lot of this stuff just went over my head, but actually like knowing, oh, like Harry's father like was gonna potentially go out of business. They were cutting him off, like little things like that I didn't pick up on as a kid. And so I really enjoyed the Green Goblin origin story. Green Goblin as a character, Willem Dafoe, I think, murders it in this role. He is great because in one hand, he's charming Norman Osborn. Like if you saw me on the street, I'd shake your hand and it would be. But then he's losing his fucking mind. He is going off the rails in other scenes where he's almost like a mad scientist. And then he's like a feral animal, and he plays all those perfectly. And even before you get to Green Goblin, like the Thanksgiving scene where he's in one moment charming Norman Osborn, and then he's like lost and confused, and then he's angry at his son a minute later, and he's just screaming about who gives a shit about that girl next to you. Like they're nothing. It really feels like a billionaire, like a scenario in which you met a billionaire and you're like, oh, what a nice guy. And then like a minute later, you're like, oh, he doesn't even look at me as like another human being. And I thought those scenes were really powerful. But Green Goblin as a villain, that's where the film really starts to feel like, oh, I'm watching Spider-Man, because I'm just watching a lot of like airborne techniques, and he's like dangling people everywhere, and Spider-Man has to save the world, save the girl, and then there's like a really funny exchange with Green Goblin, and Spider-Man, where they're talking. He's dressing up as like a person in a fire, and it's very obviously Green Goblin, but yeah, all of that is corny, but it's great. And I think Willem Dafoe kind of encapsulate everything that this movie is. It is very goofy, very fun, but at the same time, uh, it's trying. It's going for it, and it's pretty excellent in my opinion. Then you have Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane. I enjoy her. She's kind of finicky in some of her like opinions. Like you're like, why do you like 5, 6 different guys in the span of 3 movies? That being said, is she's like kind of like the mysterious girl more so in this film. Um, and I like that aspect to her. I think she kept things interesting, and they're gonna do more with her. But towards the end of the film, like especially the funeral scene, there are moments in her character, and I think this is just more of a writing thing. Uh, Really just start to annoy me at this point. I'm just getting tired of her Mary Jane ism. Um, she was a good side character, and if they kept her farther away from Peter just for at least this movie, I think it would have benefited. But they give her the whole trope, the whole Mary Jane trope, um, and oh well. We're gonna get a lot of that throughout this trilogy. Also, Spider-Man's just flinging himself all around New York City, and yeah, the CGI it's dated, but I wouldn't say it's bad. Like if you put that in a movie like nowadays, yeah, I'd be like, okay. But you can tell that they were really trying to make it work. Plus, I watched this on my widescreen DVD. Seeing that in old New York City, yeah, there's just something so classic about that. And I think these films really captured that. And even just like you have the Twin Towers in Spider Man's eyes, which are not in the film. I think they were in the trailer too. Um, just that like really dates this film. I actually have a poster of this Spider-Man poster here, like a physical one, and it's actually like really coveted because they removed a lot of the posters just for having the Twin Towers in them. Yeah, this film just feels like a fun antique now. But just other shout outs to the other characters. I like James Franco as Norman Osborn. I think he could use a little more edge. Then you have Uncle Ben, Aunt May. They're just so sweet. You love both of them. You got the famous lines from Uncle Ben: "With great power comes great responsibility," and that totally encapsulates what Spider-Man is and, what he stands for. He's a go-getter, but it's also about him living up to that. It's not about him just doing what is right. It's about him trying to understand what to do right and doing it as best he can, even though it's hard as hell. You see him get his ass kicked in this movie. You see him have doubts. He gets scared. And that's what Spider-Man is in a lot of ways because it's also a puberty story. And obviously, Toby Maguire is long past that at the time of this filming, but they get that down. There's a boyish charm to Toby Maguire, and it's fun, man. And they made it into this fun little movie. I like that his powers are actually not web shooters. I like that he actually has those as physical powers. I think when he's like first climbing the walls and jumping from building to building, because little boys fantasize about that shit all the time. And it was, I think, one of the first times in my life I had seen like a person like naturally obtain superpowers, and it just felt so real. And watching it like a decade later, yeah, it's aged. There have been different takes on Spider-Man with different good things, different bad things, but the original 2002 Sam Raimi, it's a classic. That being said, there are certain things about this film that just bother me. The second half really starts to lose my interest because it basically just becomes a game of tag with Green Goblin where he goes somewhere, wreaks havoc. We cut back to J.K. Simmons at the Daily Bugle. That's always fun. I love the photography thing. But then we go back to Green Goblin creating havoc. Spider-Man has to save the day. At that point, it's like it kind of feels like the end of a Marvel movie where it's just action, 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 but it just doesn't have the same level of special effects and stunts and CGI. So it if anything, kind of falls a little bit in that second half. But considering it's joining the Marvel MCU now, maybe it's not a terrible thing. That being said, the original Spider-Man, I love it. I think I'm gonna give it a strong 8 out of 10, and that's about what I would have given it back in the day. I'm still gonna review Spider-Man 2 and 3, so be sure to stick around to see how those ones stack up. And we'll see how many other Spider-Man films I cover before we get to No Way Home. Thank you, and until next time, with that, I leave you.